Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Legal Decipher. In the previous video we had discussed about chapter 8 of the Indian Evidence Act of 1872. If you have not seen that video you can go and check it. The link is in the description below. In this video we are going to talk about chapter 9 of the Indian Evidence Act. We'll go through the chapter and try to understand the substance therein. So if you're new here, please like and subscribe to my channel to get the video notifications. So let's get started. So in this video we are going to talk about chapter 9 that deals with witnesses. So it starts with section 118 which says who may testify. So all the persons shall be competent to testify unless the court considers that they are prevented from understanding the questions put to them or from giving rational answers to those questions by tender years, extreme old age, disease, whether of body or mind, or any other cause of the same kind. So, what section 118 says is basically that any person is competent to testify before a court, but if the court considers that such a person cannot understand the questions that are put to them or that he cannot give rational answers to those questions that will be put to him because of his tender years of age or because of extreme old age or because of any kind of bodily or mental disease or any other cause of the same kind. So those persons will be excluded from testifying. Otherwise, any other person can be testified before the court under section 118. Explanation says a lunatic is not incompetent to testify unless he is prevented by his lunacy from understanding the questions put to him and giving rational answers to them. So as we all know that lunatics may sometimes understand and give rational answers to the questions that are put to them. Not all kind of madness are of the same category. So if that person is a lunatic but he is capable of understanding the questions put to him and he also is capable in giving rational answers to those questions that are put before him, so in that case such lunatic will not be thought to be an incompetent witness that cannot testify. He will be permitted to testify. And the same happens in cases of child witnesses. A child even of 6 or 7 years of age may be allowed to testify if the court is satisfied that they have capacity to give rational testimony. A child of tender years is a competent witness when such child is intellectually sufficiently developed to understand what he or she had seen and afterwards to inform the court about it. Before the evidence of a child may be recorded, the court must by preliminary examination test his capacity to understand and to give rational answers. So the court will prior hand test him whether he can understand and give rational answers to the questions that are put forward before him and must form an opinion as to the competency of the witness. It is very desirable that a trial judge who has a child witness before him should preserve on that record, apart from the child witness's evidence, in the case some other questions and answers which could help the court to come to a conclusion whether the trial judge's decision in regard to the competency of the child witness was right or erroneous. Why is such a test done for child witnesses? Because children are most dangerous witnesses, for due to tender age they often mistake dreams for reality. They are capable of cramming things easily and reproducing them. They repeat as to their own knowledge that they have heard from others and are greatly influenced by fear of punishment or by hope of reward and by desire of notoriety. Hence, it is unsafe to rely on uncorroborated testimony of a child. Now, it is an established principle that child witnesses are dangerous witnesses as they are pliable and liable to be influenced, easily shaped and molded. Yet, it is also an accepted norm that if after careful scrutiny of their evidence, the court comes to the conclusion that there is an impress of truth in it, there is no obstacle in the way of accepting the evidence of a child witness. That is what the Indian law recognizes. Now, section 119 talks about the witnesses who are unable to communicate verbally. So, a witness who is unable to speak may give his evidence in any other manner in which he can make it intelligible. So, the primary concern will be to make his testimony intelligible. He may not be able to speak, but if he is able to make it intelligible by writing or by signs or otherwise, then despite of unable to communicate verbally, that witness can be testified. Evidence so given shall be deemed to be oral evidence. So that kind of evidence will be termed as oral evidence, and it shall be given through the signs or in writing that will be made in open court, provided that if the witness is unable to communicate verbally, the court shall take the assistance of an interpreter or a special educator in recording the statement, and such statement shall be videographed. So if the witness is unable to communicate verbally and the court is facing some kind of problem in understanding what he is trying to say, then the court may take the assistance of an interpreter or a special educator for recording of such statement, and such statement may also be videographed. Now section 120 talks about parties to civil suit and their wives or husbands. Now husband or wife of person under criminal trial. So in all civil proceedings, the parties to the suit and the husband or wife of any party to the suit shall be competent witnesses. In criminal proceedings against any person, the husband or wife of such person respectively shall be a competent witness. So that will be the status of husbands and wives in civils and criminal proceedings. Now section 121 talks about judges and magistrates. No judge or magistrate shall, except upon the special order of some court to which he is subordinate, be compelled to answer any question as to his own conduct in court as such judge or magistrate, or as to anything which came to his knowledge in court as such judge or magistrate, but he may be examined as to other matters which occurred in his presence whilst he was so acting. So the judges and magistrates does not have to answer to any question as to his own conduct while discharging his duty, or as to anything that came to his knowledge while he was discharging his duty, but he may be examined as to other matters that occurred in his presence, like section 164 statements that confession is made before him. So he was discharging his duty, and during discharge of his duty in his presence that matter occurred, so he may be later on called as a witness and testified for that. Now, section 122 talks about communications during marriage. So no person who is or has been married shall be compelled to disclose any communication made to him during marriage by any person to whom he is or has been married. So the conversations or communications between spouses are not to be disclosed, nor shall he be permitted to disclose any such communication unless the person who made it or his representative in interest consents, except in suits between married persons. So if the person who has made such communication, that means his spouse or her spouse, that means his wife or her husband, if he or she does not allow the disclosure of such communication, then the other cannot disclose it. It can be disclosed only with express consent of that person who has either made it or his representative in interest. But this principle is not followed in suits between married persons or proceedings in which one married person is prosecuted for any crime committed against the other. That means in matrimonial suits and in suits like 498A or domestic violence or cruelty upon the wife, etc. Or in cases where the wife is filing for a maintenance under section 125 of the CRPC against the husband, in those cases. Section 123 talks about evidence as to affairs of state. It says, no one shall be permitted to give any evidence derived from unpublished official records relating to any affairs of state, except with the permission of the officer as the head of the department concerned, who shall give or withhold such permission as he thinks fit. So, nothing that is unpublished official record of the state, that means the government, that will not be published, or no evidence will be permitted against such official record except with the permission of the officer of the head of the department concerned. So if the head of the department of the concerned authority permits it, then only such kind of evidence can be given, and such permission will be upon such head of the department. So it will be his choice whether he wants to withhold such permission or wants to give such permission. That will be upon him only. and nobody can compel him otherwise. Section 124 says official communications. It says no public officer shall be compelled to disclose communications made to him in official confidence when he considers that the public interest would suffer by that disclosure. So if the public officer thinks that any communication that is made to him in official confidence would disturb the public interest, or if the public interest would suffer due to such disclosure of such communication that was made to him in official confidence, then such public officer shall not be compelled to disclose any of such communication. Also, the same thing happens as per section 125 to information as to commission of offence. So no magistrate or police officer shall be compelled to say when he got any information as to the commission of any offence. Also, no revenue officer shall be compelled to say when he got any information as to the commission of any offence against the public revenue. So these are not subjects of disclosure. Section 126 says professional communications, like communications made to any barrister, attorney, pleader or vakil, they will not be permitted to be disclosed unless with his client's express consent. So if the client expressly consents for such disclosure, then only it will be disclosed, otherwise not. If such communication was made to him in the course and for the purpose of his employment as such barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil on behalf of his client. Also, the contents or conditions of any document with which he has become acquainted in the course of such purpose of his professional employment, that will also not be disclosed. Or disclosure of any advice that was given by him to his client in the course of such employment, that will also not be disclosed. So these things are not subject for disclosure, provided that nothing in this section shall protect from disclosure any such communication made in furtherance of any illegal purpose. So if the purpose is illegal, then any communication made in furtherance to that illegal purpose would be subject of disclosure, that will be disclosed. Any fact observed by any barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil in the course of his employment as such, showing that any crime or fraud has been committed since the commencement of his employment. So if he understands that since I am employed, some kind of crime or fraud has been committed, then if such fact is observed by any barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil, then that can be disclosed. Now it is immaterial whether the attention of such barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil was or was not directed to such fact by or on behalf of his client. So how he got that information, that does not matter. Explanation says the obligation stated in this section continues after the employment has ceased. So the obligation under this section of a barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil continues even after his appointment has ceased. And such conditions that are mentioned in section 126, they also apply to interpreters as well. So the provisions of section 126 shall apply to interpreters and the clerks or servants of barristers, pleaders, attorneys and vakils. That is mentioned under section 127. Now section 128 says privilege not waived by volunteering evidence. So if any party to a suit gives evidence therein at his own instance or otherwise, he shall not be deemed to have consented thereby to such disclosure as mentioned in section 126. And if any party to a suit or proceedings calls any such barrister, pleader, attorney or vakil as a witness, he shall be deemed to have consented to such disclosure only if he questions such barrister, attorney or vakil on matters which but for such question he would not be at liberty to disclose. Let's break down this complex section and understand it clearly. Section 126 lays down that a lawyer is not permitted to disclose a certain kind of communication without the consent of the client. The section also lays down that if the client who made some secret communication to a lawyer appears as witness, he does not waive the privilege afforded by section 126. So section 126 privilege will still be applied upon him. He has not waived it even if he has appeared as a witness. He cannot be cross-examined on the subject, nor the lawyer can be called to depose about the communication. And mere calling of the lawyer as a witness also does not amount to waive the privilege, and the lawyer cannot disclose the communication. So these shall be understood clearly. But if the client calls the lawyer as a witness and puts him questions in respect of the communication, his consent would be deemed, and then the lawyer would be permitted to disclose the communication. So if he calls that lawyer as a witness and puts such kind of questions that are related to the communication that was made by him to his lawyer, now in that case he had himself given the consent, that will be deemed. So everyone will think that he has already given that consent, and then the lawyer would be permitted to disclose the communication. That is what section 128 says. Section 129 talks about confidential communications with legal advisors. It says no one shall be compelled to disclose to the court any confidential communication which has taken place between him and his legal professional advisor. So that kind of communication will be kept secret unless he offers himself as a witness, in which case he may be compelled to disclose any such communication as may appear to the court necessary to be known in order to explain any evidence which he has given, but no others. So where he has offered himself as a witness, then he may be compelled to disclose any such communication that may appear before the court that it is necessary to be known in order to explain any further evidence that he has given, but no others. Section 130 says production of title deeds of witness not a party. So no witness who is not a party to a suit shall be compelled to produce his title deeds to any property or any document in virtue of which he holds the property as pledgee or mortgagee, or any document the production of which might tend to criminate him unless he has agreed in writing to produce them with the person seeking the production of such deeds of some person through whom he claims. So if a person is not a party to a suit and he has any kind of title deeds of any property that he possesses as a owner or a pledgee or a mortgagee, then he cannot be compelled to produce such kind of title deeds. That is the basic rule. Also, any document that would criminate him, that means that would bring a criminal charge against him, he is not bound to produce those documents before the court if he is not a party to that suit. Now, if a person who is a party to a suit contacts him and tells him that I need your title deeds to prove my case. Now, if this person who is not a party to the suit, who has such title deeds, if he consents with that party that yes, I am going to come to your suit and I am going to show my title deeds, then only he can be compelled to produce such deeds through that person who intends to show them. That means through that party to the suit that has contacted him. So that is the procedure. Section 131 says production of documents or electronic records which another person having possession could refuse to produce. So no one shall be compelled to produce documents in his possession or electronic records under his control which any other person would be entitled to refuse to produce if they were in his possession or control, unless such last mentioned person consents to their production. So the same thing happens to documents and electronic records which is in possession of another person. Section 132 talks about witness not excused from answering on ground that answer will criminate. So a witness shall not be excused from answering any question as to any matter relevant to the matter in issue in any suit or in any civil or criminal proceedings upon the ground that the answer to such question will criminate or may tend directly or indirectly to criminate such witness, or that it will expose or tend directly or indirectly to expose such witness to a penalty or forfeiture of any kind. So if a person is giving his witness, then he cannot take the excuse that I will not answer to this question because this question directly or indirectly is trying to criminate me, because if I give answer to this question I may face a penalty or a forfeiture of any kind and I would be exposed. He cannot take such excuse, provided that no such answer which a witness shall be compelled to give shall subject him to any arrest or prosecution or be proved against him in any criminal proceedings except a prosecution for giving false evidence by such answer. Also, this section provides and gives an immunity to such witness that if such witness is compelled to give such kind of answer that would subject him to any arrest or prosecution. Also, the proviso of this section gives an immunity to such witness that if he is compelled to give answer to such questions that would tend to criminate him, then he shall not be subject to any kind of arrest or prosecution if he gives such kind of answers. Such kind of answers will not subject him to arrest. Such kind of answers will not prosecute him or will not prove against him in any criminal proceedings except a prosecution for giving false evidence by such answer. So if he is giving a false evidence in relation to such answer, then that would criminate him. Otherwise he won't be criminated or arrested or be prosecuted. Section 133 talks about accomplice. An accomplice shall be a competent witness against an accused, and conviction is not illegal merely because it proceeds upon the uncorroborated testimony of an accomplice. So, who is an accomplice? An accomplice is one who is concerned with another or in others in the commission of a crime. So, partners in crime basically. The term accomplice includes which we call in a legal term as particeps criminis. An accomplice is a person who is a guilty associate in crime or who sustains such a relation to the criminal act that he can be jointly indicted with the principal criminal. So section 133 says that an accomplice shall be a competent witness against an accused person, and conviction is not illegal merely because it proceeds upon the uncorroborated testimony of an accomplice. So whenever an accomplice gives any testimony and that is not corroborated with other evidences, that would not make the conviction illegal merely because the testimony of the accomplice was uncorroborated. And finally, section 134 talks about number of witnesses. It says no particular number of witnesses shall in any case be required for the proof of any fact. So there is basically no particular amount or number specified for proving any fact. A person can give n number of witnesses or he may give one or two witnesses. It does not matter. The number of witnesses does not matter in cases where proof of any fact is required to be made. So that's all in this video. If you like my videos, then don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.